Uh, and this is a work that we have just completed. Actually, the report was published a couple of days ago. And it's around this, the title, as you see it, TransCanada Power Corridor, a national grid uniting Canada. That's the notion. But what's the underlying premise of this study is that a fundamental reboot of Canada's existing energy infrastructure is needed to deal with what I call emerging challenges. And you might say, well, why so and how so? Geopolitical development, of course, in general is ever present here, but specifically the rupture of our relationship with the United States, I think forces a serious examination of who we are as a country, where we're going, and where do we want to go. And again, energy security, framed in terms of affordability, reliability, availability, and so on, is so integral to the long-term economic prosperity and national security, kind of real givens, if you wish. And of course, our commitments to national obligations on the climate-related emissions also shapes the need for a rethink of what I call the overall energy system. So that's the subject. I have a number of slides I should be able to get through in about 15, 20 minutes, if you bear with me. And so that's the context. We are at a crossroads, and we must really think through a strategy that will shape future investment choices. And the pillars are obvious: energy security, national security. How do we ensure long-term economic prosperity of the country? And the issues of energy sovereignty, climate resiliency, and economic modernization kind of underpins the thinking around what I'd like to share with you. So just touch upon the key aspects, executive summary, 3 or 4 points, and then I'll get into each one of them in a moment. So the notion here really, and it's a provocation if you wish, this notion of national energy integration, that the corridor, a power corridor creates a unified national grid connecting diverse provincial energy resources from coast to coast to coast, as it were. So this is my argument against any further oil pipelines in the country. And as you know, it's a live debate, but here we want to inject the idea that I think we really need to look through the rest of the century, the decades to come, and what should the energy system look like, and what might it be other than oil and gas pipelines. So that's a provocation, and we'll leave it at that for a moment. And that we, of course, want to get to a sustainable energy transition that will reduce fossil fuel use by a substantial margin. And cutting carbon emissions is crucial. But I point out that I don't rely anymore on carbon taxes or carbon trading arrangements or incentives or any of that so-called mechanisms that have been tried and are struggling in terms of how to get to the end. And so the focus really is on infrastructure and technology investments, and what might be the emerging generation infrastructure and transmission infrastructure that focuses on electrification of the economy as a transformative innovation. And this then follows logically around economic and environmental impacts. It will support economic growth. Reliable energy transfer across the country is integral to my thinking here, and that this would position Canada as a clean energy leader. That's the vision. So the conundrum is simple and well articulated, well known. And as I say, the choice here is pipeline versus a national grid. And I believe a national grid would be a powerful unifying force and take away some of the current debates around challenges of oil pipelines and further advancing oil and natural gas pipelines. And I'm focused on Canada's national energy consumption. I'm not dealing with the export issues or what might constitute as Scope 3 emissions. Uh, but what's our problem? What's our conundrum? Well, we have a very fragmented grid, and I'll point to that in a moment. We are and have been very much dependent on the US, but that's a general point. whether it's cheese, lumber, steel, or power exports and imports, we're dependent on the US, and that's our history. But as you look ahead, how do we risk proof, let's say, against climate-induced shocks that are emerging, and we need to deal with that. So hence the proposition that we need to rethink and modernize the system in a way that we have not yet attempted in any significant way. Obvious point is well recognized. The existing system is completely balkanized, and that is by design and by the requirements of our constitution. Provinces have developed the power systems because province resources belong to the provinces constitutionally, and so that's how the system has been developed. And historically, of course, trade flows have been north-south to US markets, not east-west between the provinces. Again, a well-known fact, whether it's electricity or just about anything else. So, but electricity, we have very limited interprovincial connections and low levels of what you might call domestic electricity trade. And so we have a siloed system, north-south flows, limited interties, and very low electricity trade across the country. Here is the vision then, a national east-west power corridor. And this would then evolve into a high voltage DC-AC backbone. And if you want to get technical, we can discuss some of those aspects and challenges later. But the idea here is relatively straightforward. The notion on the left-hand side of this picture of Canada and some sort of a corridor across that perhaps follows the railroads are five generation options in wind, solar, coupled with storage, geothermal, hydro, and nuclear. These are non-carbon sources of energy. And on the right-hand side, you can look at where is the demand for energy going to come from and the end-use aspects of energy. I'll talk about that in a moment. So, but the diversity of energy resources that strengthens energy security is really part of the equation here. And getting to deep electrification is the step. And there's a little bar chart at the bottom there I want to point out. Often people talk of and discuss, can we have a 100% carbon-free electricity grid? Okay, even if you do, and we are pretty good in terms of Canada's electricity system, uh, but you have to think through the role of electricity in the final energy consumption of the demand for the country. And we're at 23%, which is actually relatively high. In most countries, it's 15, 18, 20%. So electricity itself is only a smaller proportion of the final energy consumption, which really gets it. And so therefore increasing the share of electricity in final energy consumption is really a pathway to displacement of oil and gas, in my view. And so this the work we've done here structures around over the next number of decades an increasing role for electricity within the final energy consumption. And that's the deep electrification idea. And that in turn translates into what I would call the necessary economic transformation required. Am I being completely off field here? Uh, we have seen growth in electricity demand pick up for a number of reasons and factors we can discuss. But this is the International Energy Agency's recent forecast of a demand for electricity rising up 6 times faster than total energy demand. There's a lot of historical evidence also that shows why electricity continues to creep into the final energy consumption. But now we're going to be seeing a rapid increase. And where that takes you is what is the potential? Potential for final energy demand to be electrified economically. And the left-hand side of the picture, well, electricity or energy goes into buildings, industry, transport, well known. And the yellow and green kind of give you a sense of current situation. But what you can actually go towards the right-hand side of the picture and how much of our final energy demand actually can be electrified economically. This is a lovely picture, again, based on mainly IAEA type of sources, but produced by the Ember organization. But I think it's a nice picture to show where we want to go and so on. I also try to emphasize a point, which is that electrification is really a fundamental economic transformation, and that it electricity just doesn't come out of the air. You have to produce it. So it's a highly value manufactured service, if you wish. But then its ability to drive a whole host of industries, end users, and now emerging AI, ICT, the so-called intangibles economy, and so on, is really the powerful role of electrification as a multiplier of for that unit of energy that you produce electrically is far better out in terms of GDP impacts than, for example, fossil fuels. And these few charts kind of make that point, and there are various references to support that point of view that kilowatt hour of electricity three times, well, much better GDP impacts than and so on. And as a consequential positive benefit that arises out of, you see, the current measures of trying to get to a decarbonization, whether it's by beginning at the Kyoto Protocol to Copenhagen to Paris to 30 COP meetings, we really haven't achieved very much, sadly so. And any such measures are only kind of marginal, and it doesn't get you the kind of decarbonization that you could. This blueprint scenario that we've tried to articulate actually gets you to national obligation, meeting national obligations without any such fuss around carbon taxes and so on. But it is then a massive fivefold increase in clean electricity generation, almost consistent with the IEA view on increases in generation. So going from a current 80 gigawatts to 400 gigawatts of power generation is a massive step change, if you wish. And we need to begin to think through what levels of investment that might require to achieve anything like that. Just a bit of detail. More of this is there in the report, but I won't take too much time on it, other than to give you a picture which says, obviously, innovation kind of sits at the center of all this. So yes, you will have to generate this and generate across the country, different bases. And it gives, so rather than arguments, it gives you an opportunity for every province to feed into this power national grid, whatever the resources of that particular province and the endowment of that province as part of the national grid. And so the options are there. There is, of course, we have to be able to transmit them, and then the developments of an integration of both high voltage AC and DC, and the technical folks might say, "Oh, that's a really huge challenge." Well, it isn't. It has been achieved, and this long distance transfer of powers of electricity transmission can be done cost effectively and with huge benefits to the economy. At the end use end of things, of course, we are seeing a massive electrification of the transport sector beyond just the cars. So we're looking at mass transit, freight transit, etc. Uh, all homes actually you can take natural gas out of every home in this country today, if you want to, and get to net zero homes and buildings through heat pumps and so on. So that again takes you to electricity demand. And then the smart parts of how we manage these resources and use it very efficiently at the end use through sensors and virtual power plants and so on are a host of ideas that form as part of the building blocks of what this vision might deliver. So, in simple terms, transmission is the backbone, becomes the backbone of a national energy system. And the middle picture, slightly adapted from the Canadian Electricity Association sort of picture of Canada. And as you can see, Canada's electricity system energy mix is generally pretty good. Well, certainly in Quebec and British Columbia and Manitoba, you're looking at 90 odd percent of over 99% essentially carbon free. Ontario reasonably good, but we have some natural gas. Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Alberta, a little less so, but there are new options that can come to play. So therefore, one idea that in this report, and it's a bit of a nudge, if you wish, people think of, oh, how are you going to locate these transmission lines across the country? Yes and no. We know the challenges, but if you want to minimize land use impacts, you can almost practically roll them along existing rights of ways. Railway pathway is one, but there may be others. But those are details that one would have to look at in the implementation phase of such a concept. And there is a role for natural gas, reluctantly so. I call it the smart gas strategy, because for both moderating the system and being able to have some role for gas, either in the transmission side as well as the industrial end use, because there are some aspects of energy requirements that gas will play some role, but a much reduced role over the next coming decades. Anyway, that's and I've touched upon this notion of smart grids and AI integration and so forth, so won't spend much time. But this is all not just concepts, these are ideas that are being implemented at different levels within our system already, and more of that would be really part of the vision. So you might ask, well, what are the barriers to be overcome? Or perhaps a way to visionary here, where do we go? And if you follow the short-term political calculus, let's say, that actually works against this long-term national view. Because if you say, uh, I can't subject my ratepayers to any uh, expansion of the power system beyond my province, because that's how we've organized ourselves, then that becomes a challenge. And so called harmonization of the provincial regulatory processes and planning and such becomes an important issue to be tackled as we progress. And then the notion, you see, we've designed our electricity systems to be reliable and secure from a reliability perspective. We know how to operate them and so on. But the idea that this system can actually be twinned for trade purposes has not been fully tested. Trading only occurs on the basis of the system where it's kind of opportunistic to do so. And so the system expansion should allow for large scale electricity trade. And that also then delivers on the climate goals with a much lower carbon footprint. If the generation part of the mix is essentially non-carbon, then we can get to carbon goals. So there is a huge benefit thinking in terms of trade, uh, carbon goals, but some rationalization of the national grid, if you wish. I pointed to this notion of siting transmission corridors along existing rights of ways. And here's a picture to say that this is for real. This is on the right-hand side of that railroad. It was in the U.S. There's a 345 miles, I believe, between two states, a high voltage DC line, just close to the thing, and it connects to two systems in the U.S. So it's not so far-fetched in that way. Now, whether you build transmission towers or bury the lines is a matter of economics and trade-offs that you have to work through uh, and so forth. So that's the co-location aspect. But electrification needs to move beyond just EVs, which are coming along actually quite nicely in terms of penetration of EVs in our transport sector. But beyond that, passenger rail, fast rails, freight transport, and so on. And that the notion of railways as a historical national collector, backbone, linear infrastructure of the country kind of has perhaps a romantic view, let's call it. But I believe this kind of an idea can be advanced and utilize our existing assets and land use in a way that's not so obstructive or difficult. Simple point, generation expansion, I pointed out earlier, is massive, going from 80 to 400 gigawatts, if you wish. And we looked at every system plan that is on the books for each of the provinces, each of the utilities or ministries of energy and so on. And this kind of a vision is not in there. It's incremental. They have good system plans developed based on their notions of, forecast for energy demand, some a little more aggressive than others. But by and large, this kind of a big picture, put your arms around, is not there in any of this. So it is beyond the existing system plans, but we're fully aware of what they are, and I think we just simply have to build on the back of that what already is there. And I'm going to throw one out here, uh, call it a provocation if you wish. And you can talk to people in the energy sector whom I've known over the years, and sometimes I bring this one up and I say, so are you familiar with the Mackenzie River hydro complex potential? And not many people know about it, not including the Minister of Energy in Alberta, because the Mackenzie River starts flowing from the Black Slave Lake and so on. And this was not my work, but Pierre Gingras developed this in a report. I had another paper in that particular report or book by the Canadian Academy of Engineering, looking at big future projects for Canada to become a sustainable energy power horsepower superpower, as it were. And this was from that work, and it is an interesting vision. But just so that you know, Pierre was a he's still around. He's retired. Was the chief geotechnical engineer for Hydro-Quebec when the James Bay project was developed, and he did all the cost estimation and he was a senior engineer in Hydro-Quebec when James Bay was. So he understands water and how it flows and the dams and so on. And here is a study which would generate 13,000 megawatts of power that would keep Alberta and Saskatchewan going for the next 60 years without clean power, uh, in a way that has very little land use impacts, little or minimal, in the sense that the Mackenzie River has very high banks. And so the flooding issues and impacts on our indigenous communities around land use and water and so on is somewhat limited, or actually quite limited, except in one area where you have to be quite careful about such a development. But it's a provocative, it's reasonably detailed. Of course, all those numbers would have to be updated if anyone takes that proposal seriously. We pointed out a number of other options around large scale solar and wind and nuclear and so on. I won't bore you with that, but I think it's simple that the generation expansion would be absolutely necessary. And if you look at in practical terms what China has achieved in terms of solar and wind energy, it's absolutely fantastic in terms of clean energy development in China, including that massive integration of high voltage DC systems from Mongolia into the load centers and how it integrates with the AC system. So over the last 10 or 15 years, this has been done and developed. And so it's not just completely whimsical, let's say. Some conclusions, and then I'll be done, and then look forward to your questions. So really, what we have here is an aspirational view of what a, a corridor such as a power corridor that integrates diverse sources of energy across the country, that everyone has an input into it, that there is no isolation of one jurisdiction against another, that these trade flows can be across the country as opposed to north-south. And the energy demand will come from the emerging sectors such as EVs and ICT and AI related and so on. Uh, this gets to the question of climate security, energy security, and digital independence, and so on. Targets are fairly clear. I'm actually taking out 8,500 petajoules of oil and gas energy out of the system to get to this end. And one of the things that I want to point out, which is different in the work that I've done here, is you may have seen many scenarios developed by different agencies and very credible organizations, scenarios of the future. Scenarios work is also interesting. But I take the backcasting view, if you wish. Let me get to what future I want, and then work backwards to see what are the decisions and things I have to do to get to that. So I took the view that I want oil and gas out of the system largely. And if so, then what is it that you'd have to do? And here is an answer, electricity generation and a corridor that could allow you with that through enhanced trade, meet climate obligations, create new jobs, new industries, and so on. So this is a kind of a national perspective, and it can't be done with just one province saying we will do X or Y. This has to be a whole of government society approach that says our sovereignty matters. We want to take we want to take the question of both national security and energy security seriously, and we can create a future for our own in a way that makes sense for the number of coming decades. And we've worked through, and I have to, since Barry is on the line, also a call out to Barry, who also in an earlier review of the study pointed out the importance of these key aspects of governance, regulatory frameworks, financial architecture, and so on. So, drawing upon some of his thinking, we have reasonably detailed recommendations to get at this question of a system that is essentially otherwise fractured, and what are the things you might have to do to make it work.